might want to try to go through like near the wall side. Yeah.
Tuesday night or Thursday night at 6 p.m. I want to say.
Raul's under an impression that he has his own panel.
Oh,
Are you talking about the panel?
yeah. Let me confirm. It's
No,
on-
I don't know anything about a panel, but I do know that we're supposed to be meeting our studies on
Give it 2 more minutes just to let these people.
Yeah. Let me.
And then this is the mic. So I'm gonna give that to you. Is it on?
you on a panel, but
Okay, because here's the other thing. Because I would, so I'm starting the
You have to hit it up. And then you give me like a rundown on this thing?
Check 1 2 1 2.
Oh, it's on, so she doesn't have to do anything.
No.
Welcome, everyone. How's everybody feeling? Yeah? Okay, me too. I want you all to take a second to look around you. Just humor me. Every single person here has a story, a collection of moments, of experiences, of people that make us who we are, that define the very essence of our beings. You see, our narratives, they make us who we are. They give us grounding. They give us hope. My name is Tarina Ahuja, and I'm the Director of Diversity and Outreach here at the Institute of Politics. As a Sikh Punjabi woman, I've grown up often feeling sad and frustrated that the stories of my people were never represented on the big screens and the big stages. But I came to a realization that there is no one better suited to tell our stories than us. And that is what today is about. We are making history because for the first time, we are having undergraduates speak on the John F. Kennedy Jr. Forum stage to tell us their stories, their experiences, and their calls to action. I hope today you feel the power of their stories, because stories not only allow us to connect to one another, they allow us to build movement, to build change. These stories are a testament to the fact that every single one of us belongs here, that every single one of us deserves to be here, and that none of us are an imposter in these walls. Our narratives are our power, and you will feel that today. It is my greatest honor to introduce you to 9 people who represent something so meaningful. 9 people who will give you goosebumps and maybe a few tears. 9 people who we are blessed to call our classmates. So I will now read the names and the names of their speeches as they come join us on stage. So make sure we give them so much love. Arian Morrison, Lessons from Africatown, USA. Layla Nasher, What Child Marriage Taught Me. Jay Gillard, This Is a Choice. Ryan Dawn Nguyen, Journalism, Stop Asian Hate's Unsung Hero. Kobe Garcia, Creating Our Own Families. Reese Moon, Does Politics Make You Tick? Jana Amin, Feeding a Revolution. Sarosh Nagar, The Two Faces of Healthcare in America. And last but not least, Hana Kiros, The Siege on Tigray. Let's start hearing our narratives. 2 years ago, I was given a job by Visit Mobile to script a tour about Africatown, USA. At the time, I was told that Africatown needed me to write its true story. And that might have been true, but at the end of the day, I was the one that needed Africatown. Africatown is a community located 3 miles north of downtown Mobile, Alabama. It was founded by survivors of the Clotilda, the last slave ship to traffic Africans to the United States. Today, 160 years later, descendants of those Clotilda survivors still call Africatown home. Let's get a show of hands. Who in the room has heard about Africatown? Yeah, that's what I thought. So my job was basically to increase the number of hands raised, but on the national level. Now, my bosses at Visit Mobile had the best intentions. As the government-affiliated Bureau of Tourism, they believed that if only more people knew Africatown's story, then they would come to the community, they would donate their resources to community organizations, and Africatown would begin to thrive. But for such a monumental task and a significant story, only the most qualified of researcher would do. And in their eyes, that was a Black student from Harvard who studies African histories. Now, their intentions were really good, but the impact was quite different. My hiring sent a message to the folks in Africatown that they were neither qualified enough nor trusted enough to tell their own stories. When folks in Africatown looked at me, they didn't see a qualified researcher. They saw an outsider, a snobby Harvard student ignorant of their histories. They saw a young woman whose Blackness was unrecognizable to their own, and they saw an employee of the same government that had neglected their stories for generations. Now, initially, I was super upset that my identities and me were being perceived in this way, that my Blackness was being rejected by a community that I call my own, that my Harvardness was being used to describe my qualifications, and that my Visit Mobile-ness led people to assume they knew my political convictions. But Africatown taught me that these moments of discomfort about how my identities were being perceived is secondary to my lasting obligation to acknowledge my privilege and confront my positionality. Yes, I was a young Black woman being tokenized by my majority white employers, but I was also a Harvard student being given the support and resources otherwise owed to residents of Africatown and descendants of Clotilda survivors in particular. And I was a Visit Mobile employee, furthering the agenda of a government institution that residents of Africatown rightly view as exploitative, opportunistic, and racist. So I swallowed my discomfort, weaponized my privilege, and I got to work. My work offered me beautiful moments of connection, where I got to spend hours talking to residents of Africatown and descendants of Clotilda survivors. I got to spend long afternoons in the local genealogy library in downtown Mobile. But my work was also asking my bosses at Visit Mobile to stop introducing me as a Black Harvard student, because that was alienating for residents of Africatown. My work was to consistently and constantly advocate and sometimes nag my bosses at Visit Mobile to invite residents of Africatown into our weekly tour development meetings, and then once they were there, actually listen to the concerns they were raising. My work was publicly confronting the Mobile City Council on their incredibly poor record of passing pro-Africatown legislation, and my work, probably one of the hardest, most uncomfortable things I did, was use my exit interview to ask my bosses at Visit Mobile, my coworkers turned family turned friends, to not use the tour I had spent the last 9 months working on before the residents of Africatown were actually listened to. Don't use the tour. Don't start the tour before their roads are paved, the toxic waste is cleared, the hurricane-damaged roofs are repaired, and before residents of Africatown actually explicitly tell you that they're ready to welcome the world to their doorstep. 2 years later, my tour hasn't launched. Africatown taught me that I can work within any institution that says public good is its highest aim without ever actually contributing to public good. Yes, trusting relationships between the staff at Visit Mobile and residents of Africatown blossomed and grew and strengthened while I was there, and yes, I got to work on this beautiful tour script that one day will make Africatown's history more visible to the world. I'm not going to downplay those contributions. I'm not going to say they're not important, because they were valuable for residents of Africatown and the staff at Visit Mobile and the city of Visit Mobile alike. But relationship building and storytelling alone don't make change. This is true in Africatown, where a local pastor conducted a survey and found that 50% of his congregation either has cancer or a relative who has cancer. This is true across the United States. Just last week, the Pew Research Center published a report that said that 65% of Black Americans say that the increased national focus on racial inequity hasn't translated to any meaningful change in their daily lives. Relationship building and storytelling are never enough to make change. I'm ashamed that I needed to go to Africatown, to work in Africatown, to realize that opting into politics is a privilege. That defining public service as anything, and I literally mean anything other than challenging power and redistributing resources, is a privilege. Regardless of your identities and the various privileges you have or lack thereof, you are and will always be a Harvard student. You are and will always be given credibility by powerful institutional actors. You are and will always be given resources and support that would otherwise better benefit entire communities. You are and will always have more privilege than you did the first day that you got here. Your job as a public servant is to weaponize that privilege. Make yourself uncomfortable. Confront power even when you're the only one doing it, and reallocate the resources that have been unjustly collected here and given to you for your own benefit. If you're not doing this, then your work isn't actually public service. Africatown never needed me to write its true story. Residents of Africatown and survivors of the Clotilda and their descendants alike have been telling and retelling and preserving their history for generations with a type of truth that only they will be able to know and access. Africatown only needed me to listen, to learn, and to respect that truth. But I needed Africatown. I needed Africatown to realize that it will never be enough to just be a black woman in a space that wasn't meant for me. I actually have to do something and consistently do something with that privilege. I needed Africatown to teach me how to speak up, because all we learn here at Harvard is how to be complacent and people please. And I needed Africatown to realize that it's never enough just to tell stories. We must always ask ourselves, who is benefiting from the story I'm telling right now? Who benefits from the stories we tell right now? Africatown's story never needed me, never needed any of us. But me and all of us definitely need Africatown.
My mother smiled when she told me the news. But as her words made their way from her tongue to my ears, I felt my stomach drop. Each gasp, more and more, catching for air. I began to grasp the severity of my reality as I watched my mother cradle the small black velvet box that would determine what would happen to me as it had for far too many girls before me. A small black velvet box around our lives. I was 14 years old and had just received my first marriage proposal. You see, I grew up in the tight-knit Yemeni American community of Southwest Detroit, and while we've been here for generations, our cultural and societal links to our homeland run strong, which meant that unfortunately, I was neither the first nor the last young girl to receive a marriage proposal. Before me was my mom. She was born and raised in Detroit, but at 16 years old, she was sent to Yemen to marry a stranger. There she endured over 10 years of emotional and physical abuse before she finally found the courage to flee. But with no degree and no money, her options were limited. So she decided to return to the familiarity of Detroit, because at least there, everyone knew everyone. We understood our shared struggles and our unique way of life that is so enriched in our culture. To be Yemeni in America is to grow up hearing the stories of victorious Yemeni queens from Arwat to Bilqis, connecting and inspiring the diaspora. It's to pour into each other, to see yourself as a thread woven into deeper and more colorful fabric. It's comfortable and it's comforting. But at the same time, being Yemeni in America means being tied to long-standing traditions that often taint that beauty. It means arguing with community elders as women are seen as their father's daughter, and eventually their husband's wife, but never their own beings for some reason. And to be a Yemeni girl in particular is to receive a marriage proposal at age 14. I refuse to accept this. But at the same time, I refuse to divorce the love for my community and culture that had ingrained so much beauty in me. So I became obsessed with trying to understand why these harmful traditions still prevail. I began with a simple Google search: child marriage, Middle East. And to no one's surprise, I didn't find an answer. Instead, I found dozens of articles villainizing people who look like me, depicting my sister and I as voiceless Arab women and our brothers as barbarians. By my fifth article, I had enough. And I decided then to turn away from Fox News and into my own community. And it was in the women and girls around me that I began to unravel the complexities of child marriage. You see, I grew up attending weddings for girls who were as young as 16 years old. And for many of you, that may seem like a very foreign idea. But I never thought to question it. It was not only accepted, but celebrated to get married young. It was normal, and it was fun. When I was in 10th grade, my class collectively decided to skip our English lesson in order to help our classmate Medium pack and send out her wedding invitations. Medium's wedding was the party of the year. Honestly, like, we had gone dress shopping together, and we were literally counting down the days. Even school administrators and teachers showed up to her wedding. How many of y'all went to prom? So imagine prom, but with Arabic music and, like a bride and a groom. That was basically Medium's wedding. And the Monday following, I saw Medium sitting in our American history class, and I finally decided to ask her then why she had wanted to get married so young. Medium told me something that changed the trajectory of my search for answers. What other option do I have? My parents are poor. They won't be able to provide for me in the future. I have two choices: get a job or get married. I understood Medium not only as a Yemeni woman, but first as her classmate. We were immigrants living in inner city Detroit. And underneath the poverty line, college was never an option. In our high school, 30 out of 33 teachers were permanent substitutes. Our average SAT score was an 850. And unlike many of my peers here, we did not have the luxury of college counselors, full-time administration or staff, or even extracurricular opportunities. Child marriage became a survival tactic against these extremely harsh realities. So finally finding my answer, I decided to pour myself into educational advocacy. I began to read, to write, to mobilize, and to speak. And when I was 17, I finally had the opportunity to formally apply my passions. I wrote an investigative piece for the Detroit Free Press trying to understand the connection between child marriage and education inequality in Detroit. In under a weekend, it had received over 20,000 reads and covered the Sunday print. But I refused to stop, because I come from a place where almost 300,000 children were married off before their 18th birthday. And so do all of you. Child marriage remains legal in 43 American states. And in the progressive state of California, it is legal for a 42-year-old rapist to marry his 15-year-old victim, so as long as he acquires parental consent. Unfortunately, this is also a true story. But the survivor did not look like me or any of the women in my community. By the end of my speech, 200 girls would have gotten married. As we sit here today, 650 million girls across the globe were married off as children. That's 1 in 5 worldwide. Child marriage has no race, no religion, and no culture, because it thrives of education immobility and poverty. In my home country of Yemen, after the war broke out in 2015, the rate of child brides rose from 50 to 65% within 2 years. Nothing about our culture or the way we practice Islam changed between this period. But as an economic and humanitarian crisis waged its way across the country, it became even more impossible for girls to see themselves as anything aside from wives. My community is simply seeking to survive. But at the same time, my community is rising. And this summer, I witnessed us rise. I had the opportunity to conduct research on Arab women's political leadership for the United Nations. I met and interviewed over 50 women across the Middle East and North Africa who are actively trying to solve issues like child marriage by providing opportunities to those who are impacted, rather than just dismissing them. What are we doing to support these women? Women who do not need to be saved, but need to be listened to. I have no idea why I turned on that alarm, but it is all of our responsibility to extend the microphone to women who have far too much to say, but far few people to care enough to pay attention. So for them, I continue to read, to write, to mobilize, and to speak. And for those of you wondering, No, I am not a wife, nor am I a 20-year-old divorcee. Instead, I'm the first Yemeni, to ever speak on this stage. I stand on the shoulders of the thousands of Arab women who came before me, the millions of inner city black and brown kids who've been made to believe that they have nothing important to share, and to the Yemeni child brides who will never receive this opportunity. I do this for them, for Maryam, for my mother. I am a Yemeni woman, a Detroiter, and a catalyst for change in my community. And today, I hold open the small black velvet box that I thought could only confine me. Thank you.
How are y'all doing today? Very good. On May 18th, 2018, everything changed. From my eating habits, to my sleep pattern, to my relationships with family and friends, to ultimately my view of the world. At the age of 14, I survived a horrifying I survived a horrifying mass shooting in my first period art class. And as the summer came near, I was looking forward to my upcoming birthday and the completion of my first year of high school. But despite my survival, neither I, my family, nor the Santa Fe, Texas community could have anticipated the days that followed. This tragedy led to my battle with mental health, whether it be PTSD, survivor's guilt, anxiety, and finding my position as a young African American female and Christian in a predominantly white town. Even so, over time, I came to understand that my community, more specifically my mother, who is here today in the audience, my community was made up of people who encouraged and challenged me to rise up, to build resilience, and to make good of this situation. This tragedy fueled my commitment to advocate for school shooting survivors, raise awareness about our challenges, and ultimately broaden the perceptions of what Black individuals of all ages experience on a daily. The complexity and intersectionality is real, y'all, and that's just a blanket statement. Still, there is a bigger picture here. The promotion of mental health spaces, conversations, and resources, especially in the Black community. Because throughout history, Black people have been neglected and overlooked. And not only that, we've been seen as animals. In addition to that, we've been seen as so resilient that we could face whatever was thrown at us. The educational system and the mental and emotional health of Black individuals we don't need it. It is required. It requires more attention, more involvement, more research, more funding, in order for us to feel like we can be able to share our experiences and be who we are in this country. Even so, we need spaces that we can provide for Black girls and boys around the country. I hope that in some way I can inspire you today just by being real with you. And so I want to give you guys the chance to reflect on your own lives, the past and the present. Think about all the things that you've went through, that you've overcame, and who and what you strive to be. And then look at where you are today and who you are today, because that is your story. During my time at Harvard, I've had the privilege of having conversations with those close to me or professors and other students on campus, whether it be on the sidewalk, in Annenberg, or in the Science Center Plaza. And I came to realize that everyone has a story. And that story is important in their lives because it has made them who they are. Your narrative has made you who you are. And don't let anyone else tell you different. I pray today that you all become the living testimony that can resonate with others that you see on the street or in your homes and your jobs, workplaces, school environments, so they can look up to you as they battle their trauma or overcome their mental health. Because we're all struggling in some way. Because mental health is a shared battle. And it is a shared purpose that we should all be striving and fighting for in this place. I hope that you all can be the walking hope for those you encounter. Be the light, because this place is dark. It's getting darker, but we can be the ones that represent the goodness, and we can be the ones that change the perceptions of everyone. Because what happens one day, you do not have to let that remain. You can change it. And so, I wish I had more time to share the depths of my experiences and my vision for a more mentally and emotionally connected world. But I do want to leave you all with this quote from On My Block Season 2, Episode 1. So if you all don't mind standing up and repeating after me. All right, here we go. I'm not a victim. I'm a survivor. And every day, we can choose to turn our tragedies into our greatest blessings. Because this is a choice. And every day, I will make every second count. Because today, I'm alive and okay. Yeah, I can sit down now. So alas, I hope I've touched at least 10 hearts today as a tribute to the 10 lives lost on May 18th, 2018. Thank you.
To be born into my family means to come out of the womb fearing the spotlight. It means keeping your head down, your voice low, and your words close, because that's how we've known survival to work. Because in my family, there are 21 South Vietnamese war refugees, boat people from the Exodus of 1978. And they lived because they were silent. When my grandfather was unjustly arrested and my great-grandmother was murdered, my parents held their tongues. In the spine-chilling moments, officials boarded their boats, searching for escapees. They hid quietly under the floorboards with their brothers and sisters. And in the days and days of endless drifting in the South China Sea, not complaining about the raging hunger was what kept them sane. You see, when you come from a war-torn family, attention, interacting with the world beyond is your worst enemy. That's why in middle school, I was berated after attending an ACLU organizing session. That's why in high school, when I won a full scholarship to study abroad, my relatives told me I'd be killed by the country's government, kidnapped by extremists. My dad, declining the scholarship on my behalf, asked me if I was being brainwashed, like how the communists did with Vietnamese youth. So what is journalism? What is politics to me? For the longest time, it was something to steer clear of, danger. But during the pandemic, our country was set on fire, a fire no one could run from. 2020 saw the start of 1,000 vandalisms, verbal assaults, and physical attacks against Asian Americans, and my family tree was not spared. After a neighbor called my mom racist slurs and tried to sabotage her real estate practice, we took them to court and filed for a restraint order. In Chelsea, Massachusetts, my aunt's nail salon was broken into and destroyed. Every glass pane shattered, every table, every chair upturned. And one day, I awoke to the story of Vicha Ratanapakdi, an 84-year-old Thai American shoved to the ground and killed. When I saw his image, I slammed my laptop shut and I just bawled. I bawled for hours and hours because he looked just like my Amnoy, my grandfather. For the rest of the week, I couldn't sit still. My hands curled into fists that I didn't know what to do with, and my heart felt like it was being set on fire. I could not stay silent any longer. And so I poured my hurt and my pain into writing to every Massachusetts media outlet I could think of. My name is Ryan Dongwin, I told them. I'm 18 years old, and I'm gonna put something together here in Boston, because this must stop. Please spread the word, I pleaded. And on March 13th, 2021, 1,000 people of all colors, backgrounds, and ages showed up to my rally to march in solidarity against anti-Asian hate. It's now cited as one of the nation's first recorded anti-Asian hate protests. Since then, my organizing committee has been able to raise more than $16,000 for local AAPI organizations, speak to schools and towns throughout New England, and amass more than 70,000 followers on a platform we launched to circulate AAPI news and resources. When I reflect on how we were able to do this, I realize that I owe it all to the ones who first shared my story. I owe it all to the ones who call themselves journalists. Journalism, I've come to realize, doesn't just document history, it creates it. Coverage of George Floyd's murder sparked an unprecedented wave of civil unrest and brought extraordinary attention to systemic racism. The continued reporting of attacks against Asian Americans and subsequent pressure led Biden to sign the COVID-19 Hate Crimes Act into law. When you look into the heart of journalism, you'll see the cultivation of dialogue. You'll see the creation of necessary and much needed conversations. When I look into the heart of journalism, I see my purpose, because it's journalism that helped me find my voice amidst the silence. In 2017, I secured the mentorship of Emmy Award-winning news producer Jeff McIntyre, and I worked for months researching Arkansas's Jerome incarceration camp. I was determined to connect the prejudice and struggle to survive my parents faced without rights as Vietnam War refugees to that of World War II Japanese Americans. And after I presented my film at the Minidoka pilgrimage in Twin Falls, Idaho, to hundreds of families who survived the camps, a former incarceree came up and told me something that I'd never forget. Ryan, keep honoring Densho. Densho means to pass on to the next generation. Densho means to leave a legacy. Densho is what makes our living worth it. For me, journalism is the best way I can honor Densho. Because through sharing stories, through keeping history and names alive, we can ensure that atrocities like the Chinese Exclusion Act, the murder of Vincent Chin, the Atlanta spa shootings never happen again. With journalism, stopping Asian hate doesn't seem all that impossible. With journalism, we can truly change the world. Today, I'm 20 years old. I've reported for my town paper, for the Harvard Crimson, and a few other publications. But I don't consider myself a great journalist yet, or even a good one. I have so much to learn, and I still struggle with public speaking. But all I know is that I belong in journalism. It's where I feel my future and my fate lies. Because it's due to journalism that I learned silence isn't the only path. Due to journalism, I found my own way of protecting the ones I care about. Due to journalism, I stand here beneath the spotlight, this time unafraid. Thank you.
At the age of 13, I became one of the 424,000 foster care children in our country. This is my story. Before I was born, my mother immigrated to the United States and married my stepfather. In the 8th grade, they had a violent divorce that ended in my separation from both of them. My early high school years would be filled moving to different group homes and transferring high schools several times. Even if I wanted to return home, there was no home for me to return to. Any resemblance of what home looked like had been destroyed through their divorce. This lack of community, support, and family would fuel discipline problems and academic struggles. I would talk back to teachers, start arguments with fellow classmates, and even be expelled my freshman year of high school. This led to some teachers suggesting that I volunteered at an organization called Hope for Tomorrow in order to avoid serving detentions. Hope for Tomorrow is an organization that provides support to Burmese refugees as they transition to the United States. They offer a holistic range of supports, including citizenship classes, an after-school program, and even assistance through the application for citizenship. I began to volunteer with Hope for Tomorrow, helping teach students with, I would just help teach students and manage the classroom. I really enjoyed being at Hope for Tomorrow, and I got to learn more about the students, the parents, the teachers, and even got to meet the director of Hope for Tomorrow. a young boy escaping Burma through the jungles of Malaysia. That was his story. Even the children had their stories. The children, barely old enough to do long division, recall their escapes from Burma, their life in the refugee camp, and eventually their journey to the United States. After getting to learn their stories and how they interacted in American society, I felt something calling me to volunteer there every day after school. After a year of consistent volunteering, the director of Hope for Tomorrow approached me and offered me a job. And I took it because I really liked the job and I just really enjoyed working with these kids. And then COVID-19 happened. And a lot of these students were not prepared for what would come next. They lacked Wi-Fi, they lacked technology, they even lacked textbooks that would make virtual learning easier. At Hope for Tomorrow, we went above and beyond and geared these students with technology, updated their parents with information about COVID-19, and even offered to tutor these students free of cost. My favorite lesson throughout the pandemic was teaching these students how to use email. The day after the lesson, my inbox would be filled with requests for assistance for their homework, what my favorite color was, and even how much they miss being at Hope for Tomorrow. I realized how important Hope for Tomorrow was for them, and when we returned in person, I made it my goal to become their brother, albeit in a non-traditional way. When we came back to Hope for Tomorrow, I would throw parties to celebrate their culture and their identity and to ensure that they knew what a proud label being called a refugee was. I even got to participate in Hope for Tomorrow's annual tradition called Night of Burma, where they would celebrate Burmese culture and identity. I got to wear traditional attire, participate in dances, and even learn some of their dialects. We would hold these students accountable for their actions, teach them what was right and what was wrong. On rainy days, we would stay in the classroom and watch movies, and on sunny days, we would go out and play soccer. I fell in love with these students. Even after I left Hope for Tomorrow, I still get videos of these students wishing me good luck on my finals or about how much they miss me. These students and the parents and the teachers and just the Hope for Tomorrow community really became my family and transcended the traditional definition of what it means to be a family. Without these students, I wouldn't be here where I am. It was really, really hard being a foster kid. I went through some difficult and traumatic moments, and what made it worse was that I was alone. But through community service, I found a new family that helped bring a sense of normalcy and change the definition of what it means to be a family. Because at Hope for Tomorrow, I saw those intimate relationships between people who had a common story and a common identity, but were not related by blood. Hope for Tomorrow changed my definition of what being a family was. There's this notion in our society that those intimate relationships are exclusively for family, but it doesn't have to be this way. We can form those intimate relationships with people throughout our community. When we start forming those intimate relationships with people outside of our community, we start realizing that 1 in 3 adults in Massachusetts face food insecurity. We start becoming upset that thousands of workers in Massachusetts don't have access to public transportation because of the Orange Line shutdown. We start researching why Boston has one of the highest homeless rates throughout the whole country. And we start acting. We start volunteering at food pantries or protesting for workers' rights. I've continued this journey of creating a family at Harvard through the civics program with the IOP, where I teach 5th graders of the importance of politics and being civically engaged in our society. Whether it's through teaching, donating, or even protesting Asian hate, it is important that we go into our communities and we form these relationships. These relationships do not have to exist solely in family. We can create these relationships outside of our community. And I challenge every single person in this audience to start treating people in our community as family, especially those who are disenfranchised. Examples would include those who are incarcerated, those who are refugees, those who are homeless. When I was 13, I thought I lost my family. But through Hope for Tomorrow and in other communities throughout my high school year, I was able to create a stronger, more diverse, and more vibrant community. And I'm attempting to create that same community here at Harvard with you guys. Thank you.
I have Tourette syndrome, and if you'd asked me just 3 years ago to come out on a stage and announce it, I probably would have laughed in your face and said it's an impossible demand. But today I stand to remind all of us the power of a voice, and particularly the power of our voices together. As a preteen entering middle school, nothing was more terrifying and embarrassing to me than the attention that having a visible disability brought. The questions, the glares, the laughter. So I traversed these years of strange, pubescent awkwardness behind a facade. I laughed off hurtful comments, ignored distasteful remarks, and just got by with a smile. But the reality was that I wanted to hide. Today, identity politics can evoke a range of negative emotions, from distrust, anger, fear even. But I'm here to tell you how my identity shaped my politics, how it brought me to national political advocacy, and even this stage today. One of my experiences as an ambassador for the Youth Association of the Tourette Association of America was representing the causes and the grievances that young individuals had today. Whether it be the lack of access to telehealth, or the difficulties during the pandemic to secure sustainable prescriptions for medications to secure a fulfilling life, there are a variety of grievances that have been unheard as a result of individuals with mental health issues to be represented in political spaces. As we continue thinking about how we inform our politics, I urge all of you to consider the lack of mental health being discussed in our political arenas. Today, my story is unique and personal to me because of my experience with Tourette syndrome. But inside every one of us is a powerful narrative racked with transformative potential to create a profound change. From the first day of dealing with my diagnosis to the day that I stand here today delivering a speech on the JFK Jr. Forum, I have constantly grappled with how identity informs my politics and how I can leverage my experiences to create a more effective form of advocacy. And I never would have dreamed that I would have been able to stand on the stage here today, but we live in a world where a teenager like me can just start an Instagram account about the misconceptions of Tourette syndrome and OCD, and suddenly find himself speaking to national congressmen on how to best revise our national policy on mental health care, or even speaking on Harvard University's JFK Jr. Forum stage. Today, Tourette syndrome has changed me and shaped me into a person more resilient and tenacious than I could have ever imagined. Once the root of my shame and embarrassment, my neurological condition has informed me to develop a sense of empathy and a keen understanding of situations that I cannot see, visible or invisible. And as we continue to traverse new social situations, I urge everyone to consider the battles that everyone is facing, whether it's internal or external, and leverage that energy to create effective and sustainable political movements. Today, I am an individual hardened by the adversity of a chronic mental illness, but I am softened by a greater understanding of empathy and a capacity to grow. From the most intimate of situations, like explaining to my family members the importance of using inclusive language, to the toughest battles, like explaining to my federal congressman why there is a demand for us to revise the national policy on effective and affordable insurance, I urge everyone to use their voice, because today is the day that mental health no longer remains sidestepped in discussions of politics. Use your voice, whether it is to advocate for accessible K-12 public school education that is inclusive and informs individuals on questions of mental health. Use your voice to advocate for effective telehealth services that reach every rural corner of America so that individuals who lack access to broadband and effective healthcare services can get the prescriptions that they need to live a fulfilling life. Or use your voice like I did to fight for the reformation of our unfair and unequitable insurance policies that leave a huge gap in the socioeconomic strata of the United States when it comes to dealing with mental issues. Today, I speak out in the hopes that an individual or any middle school boy who is so ashamed and embarrassed to share his story can gain the courage and bravery to speak out on a stage and join political activism. I speak out in the hopes that any individual who feels trapped in the embarrassment of their experiences can find the courage to use their voice for a political good. In that way, you might even say that politics makes me tick, and it should make everyone else too. Thank you.
At the age of 8, I helped feed a revolution. Seated next to my grandmother, I pounded, molded, and kneaded the kak, a crumbly biscuit covered in powdered sugar that is an Egyptian favorite. I'm distracted, mesmerized by the sea of women in bright red hijabs on television, demanding change. Together, they topple a regime. I scan their faces for my aunt. Together, my Egyptian grandmother and I are 2 generations of women, 50 years apart, supporting change for the country we love by baking kak for those very crowds. The women in particular stay with me. The ferocity in their words, the energy in their protests, their desire to see a better Egypt. The picture stays with me forever. And I vow to become just like them, driven, impassioned, and empowered. But when, at the age of 13, I moved to the US and no longer see women like them every day, I began to forget how important their contributions were, how strong they were, how powerful I could be. Over and over again, I'm told that public servants don't look like me, that Arabs weren't made for democracy, that Muslim women are void of a voice. But I disagree because I see public service in my communities all around me. It is not grand, loud, or flashy. It is not recognized by the IOP, Harvard, or the White House. It is generous, warm, and hospitable. Because isn't that what public service should be? As a Muslim, Egyptian American woman in the United States, I have been left with no choice but to redefine for myself what it means to be a public servant and what it means to be an activist. Today, I know that I see public service and activism all around me. You see, my family got our US citizenship exactly 3 days after Trump secured the Republican Party's nomination. By then, candidate Trump had already said that he would publicly consider closing down mosques in the United States, creating a public registry of Muslim Americans, and claimed in front of millions of people that Islam hates us. But my newly minted Egyptian American single mother refused to let Trump overshadow what was meant to be a joyous occasion. A badass female tech CEO in a male-dominated space. She knew firsthand the importance of minorities taking up space. So that is exactly what we did. Celebrated with red, white, and blue cupcakes in hand, Arabic music blaring in the background. Owning our identities against a backdrop of hateful xenophobic rhetoric was a form of activism and resilience. Indeed, it was the same activism and resilience that Muslim and Arab women would embody for the next 6 years, navigating the Trump era and pandemic alike with admirable honesty, empathy, and generosity. I am here today because of those women. They inspired me to use my own voice, speak up for the communities I care about, and advocate for the solutions I believe in. Celebrating our American citizenship may have been my first introduction to activism and resilience in this country, but it has certainly not been my last. In May of 2020, amidst the COVID-19 pandemic, I learned that 20 million fewer girls would be returning to school that fall because of the negative impacts on the economics of COVID-19. Having witnessed the transformational effects of girls' education in the Middle East firsthand, I was devastated. These were young women, our age or younger, who would never learn how to read. They would never learn how to write. So I organized #17for17, advocating for girls' education, a 6-hour virtual event bringing together 17 speakers from 17 countries around the world, including key stakeholders such as the CEO of the Malala Fund, the Egyptian Minister of International Development, and over 5 young women who had been denied their education themselves. The event reached over 71,000 social media accounts and 17,000 live listeners. But I could not stop there. Ever since, I've been on a mission to uncover what I know each girl possesses: her vision and voice. Today, young women continue to be excluded from crucial decision-making and peacemaking processes around the world. But the lack of representation of young women, and especially young women of color, can no longer be ignored. As UN High-Level Commission Dr. Alat Murabit shares, if we include women, peace processes are 35 times more likely to last 15 years. So, why don't we do it? We must all play a role in actively listening to and uplifting the voices of young women at the table. Ask yourself, whose stories are you listening to? What voices are you uplifting? What narratives are you telling? Join my organization, J Strategy, the first ever global speaking bureau actively connecting young women to the speaking platforms they deserve, as well as offering public speaking trainings, workshops, and fellowships to young women around the world. Ultimately, as surreal as it is to be speaking at this forum today, like Layla, I want to acknowledge that I would not be here without the thousands of women who've come before me, like America's first Muslim women, slaves brought over from West African tribes, ultimately constituting Gambia, Guinea, Mauritania, Mali, and Niger. While they are forced to practice Islam in secret, they never once gave up on their faith or each other. Inshallah, God willing, we can all learn to do the same. Be public servants who practice radical care, celebrate our identities, and march forward in resilience. Blue, white, and red cupcakes in hand. To all those women, women like my grandmother, who taught me how to make kak, like my mother, who taught me how to take up space, and like Jana Ramadan, IOP's first Palestinian president. To them, I want to say shukran.
I'm happier than I've ever been before. That sentence was told to me by a patient at a hospital I used to work at. As I was rolling her to the front of the hospital, I asked her why she was so happy. She told me she had a neurodegenerative disorder, one where her very future and life looked uncertain. But then, when all her hope seemed lost, she was offered the chance to join a clinical trial for a new drug, one that would save her life. Her face beamed with joy, and I was thrilled too. It was incredible to me to see how innovation had saved her life. A few days later, I was preparing to leave the very same hospital when I saw another patient, a woman much older, walking with her son. Except this time, she didn't look that happy. She was sweating, she was anxious, her hands were shaking, and she was talking quickly, rapidly to her son. And as she walked by, she said something that forever shocked and changed me. She said, "I don't know if I can afford my medications today." And as she told her son that, her son tried to comfort her, telling her it would work out. But ultimately, she seemed anxious, scared, distressed about that answer. And it hit me. We all hear every day America's healthcare system is broken and unaffordable. My parents have told me stories about all the times it has been broken and unaffordable for them in India and for many people I've known. But it's one thing to hear it, and it is another thing to see it. And it is the story of her and countless patients like her that forever changed my view on healthcare and health in America. There are two faces to health in this country. On one side, there is incredible promise. You can walk 15 minutes to the Seas building and see firsthand the wonders of modern medicine. New drugs that could cure our oldest diseases, vaccines that have saved millions, if not billions of lives during this pandemic. And beyond that, with artificial intelligence, gene modification, and so much more in this future, we will be able to eradicate our deadliest diseases and save millions of lives worldwide. That is an incredible, incredible opportunity for our futures. But when someone discovers something new, when someone changes, when someone has power, it's always worth asking who will benefit from that discovery, who will benefit from that power. The second face of health in America are the millions of people who cannot afford their basic medications, prescriptions, and checkups. 58 million Americans struggle each year to afford their prescription drugs. 62% of bankruptcies in this country are caused by medical debt. We must admit as a society that for millions of people, especially the most vulnerable and marginalized communities, basic healthcare, what you need to survive, is fundamentally unaffordable and can be financially ruinous to pay for. If you hear that, most people I've talked to have gone and said, "I want to do something about it." And I know I did. After this happened and I saw them, I took some time off my job at the hospital, and I founded a nonprofit program to provide critical healthcare and rehabilitation services to low-income communities. I also worked for years to try to do research work to think about how we can design the policies that will make healthcare affordable. And I worked at both the federal and state level with legislators and other politicians to ensure that we are effectively able to make healthcare affordable and work for all Americans. But there is one thing throughout all of this that shocked me and saddened me deeply, and it is this sense of demoralization. Healthcare is complicated, everyone can say that. But so many people feel like they cannot make a difference. Many, many people feel that they cannot make a difference because of who they are. But furthermore, beyond that, so many people feel like they don't have the qualifications or passion or experience necessary. I once spoke to a young boy who said he wanted to be a doctor, but he said he felt like he could do nothing to help the people around him until he graduated from medical school. And yet, even among those who care, so many people think they cannot do anything because of the powerful forces and actors that control our health and well-being in our society. But the truth is, they can. Every single person in this room, every single one of you, every single one of us can make a difference on issues, especially those as important to us as our own health and well-being. There is anything we all can do, whether it's writing, speaking, journalism, activism, nonprofits, research, whatever you want to do. Everyone can make the difference they care about on these kinds of issues and build a healthcare system that works for all of us. For me, it comes through research and policy. But for everyone else, it's different. And what I encourage everyone listening here today to do is find what makes you passionate and what you can do to make healthcare and the health and well-being of your communities, and especially those of you from marginalized and vulnerable communities, what can be done to help those communities and uplift their health. Change is hard. Change is messy. Change isn't perfect, nor will it ever be perfect. But it is worth trying. For every life we can save, for every person who will be able to afford medications, it is worth trying. Together, we can make a healthier America, but we can only do it with our individual strength, agency, and determination. There are indeed two faces to health in America. But if everyone in this room and everyone beyond put in the effort to try to make it better, we might make both of them smile. Together, we might be able to make every patient say, "I'm happier than I've ever been before." Thank you.
Hi, everyone. For over 100 days, my grandmother was completely unreachable. On day 100 and something, my dad managed to get her on the phone. When he did, my stern and sweet and loving Mama Kidan said that she wished that she had died 5 years earlier so she didn't have to see what had happened to her home. On the day of the last US presidential election, November 4th, 2020, a war broke out in Ethiopia, in Ethiopia's Tigray region. While the world was on the edge of its seat, Ethiopia's prime minister launched a military offensive against the state of Tigray, which is where my dad's side of the family resides, and where I'm from. Tigray is home to 5 million ethnic Tigrayans, who make up just 6% of Ethiopians. Academics estimate the war has killed 500,000 people in 18 months alone. These people aren't dying on the battlefield. They estimate that 300,000 are dying due to the restriction of medical and food aid in the conflict. Thousands of civilians have been killed in door-to-door massacres. The oldest confirmed victims are in their 90s. The youngest are infants. In just the past 2 weeks, airstrikes have targeted a children's playground and hospital in Tigray. Multiple kids died. On the very first day of the war, Ethiopia's Prime Minister, Abiy Ahmed, cut off electricity to the entirety of Tigray, leaving civilians literally in the dark. He also cut off banking services, internet, and phone lines. Imagine suddenly losing access to all of the money that you have. Imagine having no way to cry out for help. 2 years later, throughout much of Tigray, these basic services are still withheld. Overnight, nearly half of my family disappeared behind this communications blackout. I knew they were living without power. I knew they were living in a war zone. But really, I didn't even know if they were living. Ethiopia's prime minister won the Nobel Peace Prize in 2019 during his first year in office for making peace with the dictator of Eritrea. But that peace turned out to be the opposite. They'd struck a military alliance. Ethiopian and Eritrean troops have unleashed a reign of terror in Tigray. As they moved through the region, where 80% of workers are farmers, they burned crops, slaughtered livestock, stole equipment, and threatened to kill farmers that tended to their land, demolishing Tigray's capacity to feed itself. Secretary of State Anthony Blinken called the atrocities Ethiopian and Eritrean forces committed in Tigray ethnic cleansing in early 2021. But the US and the UN danced around a similar word that could compel them to act: genocide. Thousands of Tigrayans have been detained on the basis of their ethnicity alone, according to the UN. Tigrayans tend to have recognizable last names. Kiros is an example of one. Most also speak Tigrinya, which is a language that I've been lucky enough to study here at Harvard. Based on these clues, innocent people across Ethiopia have been kidnapped and detained in makeshift prison camps, including a family member who I can't name to protect their safety. People cramped into these camps are beaten, denied medical aid, and even die there. At least 9,000 remain imprisoned. Rape has also been weaponized systematically throughout the conflict. These assaults are designed to be so brutal that they ensure that the victims cannot have kids, according to US aid head Samantha Power. The Tigrayans that survive the camps, bombings, massacres, and assaults are slowly but surely being killed by the siege. The Ethiopian government has been deliberately starving Tigrayans to death for the past 2 years by obstructing the ability of humanitarians and other aid workers to deliver life-saving aid. They're doing this with such vitriol that troops have shot at and arrested UN workers. No medicine, no food, and no fuel have been allowed to enter Tigray for month-long stretches over the past 2 years. What's eked through is woefully insufficient to dent the scale of malnourishment and starvation. In many ways, the past 2 years have felt like a nightmare. It's hard to stomach the fact that my grandmother, who is 80 years old, hasn't had access to medicine for 2 years. It's hard to wrap my mind around the fact that my little cousin Grace, who loves anime and is learning Japanese from it, is now terrified of planes because she's never ridden on them, but she only knows that they signal bombs. But it's also been devastating to realize how little it seemed that anyone cares. In 2021, I interned for the Washington Post. Magically, I essentially got to join their editorial board, writing the majority opinions for the paper weekly. I was authoring pieces that focused primarily on international human rights abuses. 3 of those were on Ethiopia, but many others focused on atrocities that were happening in Asia and in India, and even human rights abuses in the United States. There are policies in place that are meant to restrict efforts to obstruct humanitarian aid, and there are policies in place that the UN could implement to prevent what's happening in Tigray. When I rack my head for why that might not be happening, I wonder if people just view Africa as a place where people are destined to suffer, or whether people conceptualize those that are in the rest of the world as people who just have less rich internal lives than their own. But while I was at the Post thinking about what I would use that unprecedented platform to write about, I thought of the importance of thinking of people who weren't of my background, people who also needed a voice. When I was talking with my dad earlier this week, he mentioned that where he's from in Tigray, they didn't get power until he was in 9th grade, and how exciting that was for him. In that region, where he lived, there weren't paved roads, so his father, who was a priest and who had polio, had to be carried to the church because there was no road to wheel him there on. When I was in Adwa, my dad's hometown, in 2016, I was able to rein in the new year with Anderson Cooper because they had power and they had cable, and my dad and I could both marvel at the progress that had occurred. I think part of why the pain of this conflict is so deep is because I know an Adwa and I know a Tigray where there's no suffering, and where my cousins and my grandmother and my family can live without starvation hanging over their heads. But it can't be that we only notice atrocities that are connected to our identity. When Jana approached me in the Fahodi Hall with a piece of paper asking me to donate to the Pakistani Flood Relief Initiative on campus, my first thought was, I'm broke. But I thought of the hopelessness and the despair that I felt when my family was helpless. So I figured that I could not drink chai latte for a week and could at least give a little bit. So what I'm begging everyone here today to do is to know that there's suffering in Tigray and in Ethiopia broadly, but also to just remember that nothing can get done if the only people that care are the people who are hurting and the people who are suffering. And I dream about a day when I can call my grandmother, when I can talk to my cousins, when I can know that my aunts and uncles are all right. And when that day comes, maybe I'll write a piece about it that has less to do with suffering and more to do with hope. Thank you.
Thank you all so much. This event was envisioned out of a need to make space for the stories that you all just heard, a need to make sure that this space not only hears these stories, but acts because of them. And I think that all of us here today are gonna act because of these 9 beautiful stories, the bravery and courage it takes to get up on this stage and be so vulnerable. So if I could ask you to join me in one more round of applause for these 9 beautiful humans. Thank you all so very much, and I hope you have a beautiful weekend. Thank you for coming.